thank everybody again for joining us this week. It's our first week after the holiday break. You may remember that before the holiday, we had 4 different lessons where we went through and we talked about Indigenous and First Nation history in Canada. And we also started learning a little bit more in depth about the different grandfather teachings, which are a very major part of the belief system in a lot of First Nation and Indigenous tribes and culture. So we're going to be continuing along through. I also just want to remind everybody that you had a little homework, didn't you? Seems to me that last week that we all got together right before the holiday break, everybody was asked to take a little bit of time to make a teepee. Da, 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 da. We had been talking about respect right before the holidays, and everybody had been given a little challenge to go around and find some things. You didn't have to spend a lot of money, just find the tools that are around you and to make something that was teepee inspired. And I showed you Kathleen's example from her activity where she had the turtles and the bear, the eagle feather, different symbols that have grown to mean something to her over these last several weeks. And so she put those on there and anyway, made this lovely, lovely teepee. So if anybody does have a teepee that you made over the holidays and you want to snap a little picture of it and throw it in our chat, I just want to encourage you to please go ahead and share it if you would like. Again, there's no pressure. Nobody has to. We're going to be moving on with a new lesson here in just a couple of moments. But just looking back on that, if you do want to share, feel free to throw it in the chat and let us see some of your amazing creations. There was also a great comment from Jessica, one of our participants here, and she had mentioned that she had actually made some calls and did a little research into it before she made her teepee over the holidays. And if you were looking to make one that is a little bit more authentic, I guess you might say, a number of people use 7 branches or 7 poles to represent the 7 grandfather teachings when they're building their teepee. So you may go and use 7 twigs or 7 sticks when you're making your little teepee, which I just thought was a really, really interesting thing to bring up. There are so many beautiful parts of First Nations and Indigenous culture, which I've been able to learn to appreciate recently. Again, I'm not First Nations or Indigenous myself, but hoping to be a part of this reconciliation process, I've been able to open my mind and embrace a lot of these different aspects of their culture and really come to appreciate the belief system and the values that they hold. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue the conversation today and continue having a little bit of fun with it there. So this week we're moving forward with another one of these grandfather teachings, and it's all about bravery, and bravery being to face the foe with integrity. And we're going to talk about what that means as we get into our discussion today. You know, what is it to have a foe? Not necessarily a person, but something that we need to overcome. And what is it to face that with integrity and to be brave? And what do we need to have to be able to do that? But of course, before we get too far into anything, I'm just going to read through the Territory Acknowledgement really quickly here, because we always want to begin each week by acknowledging that the land that we are living on and gathering on is the traditional territory of the Indigenous people of Canada. We want to recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place where we are now living and working. As guests on this land, we want to thank all of the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We also recognize the contribution of the Métis, Inuit, Mi'kmaq, and other Indigenous people to the richness of our community, province, and country as a whole. We aspire to continue strengthening ties with the communities we serve and work in, as well as build a future together through learning and reconciliation. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen for a few slides so that she can remind us a little bit about, well, what is this bravery teaching? And we have a little video, and I'll turn it over to you there, Kathleen.
Sorry, my computer's lagging. So today we're going to be looking at bravery. It's one of the teachings of the seven grandfather teachings. Are we playing the video first?
Yeah, we can put that on right away.
This lesson is the one of courage. The symbol of courage is the bear. The bear carries courage. We seek the strength and courage to face our greatest enemy, ourselves. Whether it's a religion, overcoming your fears, keeping your faith in a difficult time is one of the most courageous acts you can commit to, especially when others don't agree with you. When things are difficult, it's okay to be fearful and make mistakes. That's how we learn. Courage is to try new things that seem difficult. Sometimes courage is just getting out of bed in the morning. It is doing the right thing in a difficult situation. Stand up for someone who's being bullied. Stand up for yourself. Courage is being scared to do something and finding the courage to go ahead and do it anyway. However, courage does not always mean never being afraid. There are times when it's all right to be frightened and to run away from danger. It means not being reckless or cowardly, but facing up to our duties and responsibilities. Admitting to mistakes, taking a full responsibility for your actions. Sometimes we demonstrate more courage when we are fearful, and then go ahead and do it despite our fear. That shows the most courage of all. Sometimes we don't know how to say no to our peers, and when they ask us to do something that's dangerous or risky or just wrong, it's okay to say no. Courage is a daily practice, especially in the classroom. You are trying new things every day at school. You need to ask yourself 3 things. 1, the trouble rule. Will this action break a law or a rule? 2, make a good decision. Think carefully about the risk or possible consequences. And 3, act fast to avoid trouble by using some options like say no, leave, or suggest something better to do. Just as the bear hibernates during the winter and reawakens each spring, we too need rest and renewal. The bear shows us how to live a balanced life, where there is a time to be playful and a time to be assertive and courageous. Just as courage sleeps in the bear throughout the long winter months, courage is resting in you. Courage can be found in the smallest and the biggest of creatures. This is a story of butterflies. Once there were 2 beautiful butterflies that lived in a glass house, and they danced among the plants in there. They were so busy growing and dancing and singing that they didn't notice what was on the other side of the glass. And then one day while they were sitting on a leaf, they looked out the window and they saw this beautiful garden full of flowers of every color. It was so wonderful to look at them with delight, all the flowers, when they noticed this one beautiful red rose bush and white lilies. Oh, how beautiful the red flower is. I know she would be my friend if only we were able to go out into the garden. Oh, yes, said the other little butterfly. If only we were free to be in the garden, we could dance all day and then sleep inside those beautiful flowers. We are bigger and ready for adventures. They trembled as they thought of that fierce old man who cared for the garden. He would shout at the birds and shake his fist and stomp his feet. Leave my strawberries alone. They didn't know what strawberries were, but they were really frightened by his anger. Their friend the bee told them that the old man really wasn't so fierce and they had to really try and be courageous. But the butterflies cried even more. They were so busy crying, they didn't notice the old man opened the door to the glass house. He came up to them and ever so gently he asked, "What is the matter, my little butterflies?" Now at first they didn't see the loving look or hear the gentleness in his voice. And then they thought of the advice from their friend the bee. If they ever wanted to go into the garden, they had to be brave. So, taking a deep breath, one little butterfly told the old man, "We were born in your glass house and we've been very happy there, but now we're bigger and we want to go out into the garden." "Please?" said the other butterfly. To their surprise, the old man smiled. "Of course you want to go into the garden. Every butterfly should be free to move about and dance and sing. I will leave the door open for you so you can go out and in. They moved close to the door, and finally they flew out into the garden. They could smell the flowers, and they saw their friend the bee, and soon they were dancing around the garden. At first, the butterflies went back into the glass house each night. Eventually, one snuggled into the red rose to sleep, and the other one snuggled into the petals of the white lily to go to sleep. And there amongst the plants in the glass house and the flowers in the garden, the butterflies were very happy. For all I know, they're still living there. Listen to your heart. It takes courage to do what is right. Daily challenges takes courage to overcome. Never give in, never give up.
Here we go. So a lovely little story from Hazel, actually a couple of them. The first one reminding us of the bear, who represents bravery from the 7 grandfather teachings. And the bear knows when to be playful, when to be restful, when to be courageous and assertive. And it demonstrates to us all of these ideas behind this teaching. The fact that we need to act with integrity and respect, and we need to do the difficult things even when it's not easy. We need to have that courage. And the story of the butterfly that she shares with us is also very insightful. It reflects to it quite nicely, doesn't it? The butterflies were so scared to ask to go out there. Yet had they had the courage just to ask, they would have been invited. He was very welcoming, very open to having them into the garden. And they were invited in. All they needed to do was ask. So, Kathleen, I'll turn it back over to you there.
We're just gonna start with a little icebreaker, and since we're on the topic of courage, I had made a little sheet initially if we were in person. It's so basically a cup full of courage. So every day we're faced with challenges. So I want everyone to show us like how you face every life challenges, or how you show courage or bravery. Guess I could break the ice. One way that I guess I showed courage was a few years ago. I'll go back to the past for a bit. I always dreamed of traveling. It was something that I thought was impossible, and it was just something like bucket list and whatnot. And eventually got the courage to could never find anyone to go with me because it's not something everyone could do or afford or whatnot. So I just ended up going by myself about 7 years ago. I found the courage and the bravery to just go to another country, a foreign country, all alone. And since then, well, it really helped me to build even more courage and to be even more brave to face other situations in life.
That's awesome. So I'll give an example as well, because I know we don't have a little worksheet to give out to everybody. So maybe we can encourage them just to type some messages into our chat. Let us know, what are times in your life that you have kind of faced a challenge or an adverse moment with a bit of bravery. How do you show bravery? And it can be those everyday things, or it could be maybe a big moment in your life. That sounds like a pretty big moment, Kathleen, the first time that you would break out of that comfort zone, I imagine. I have a couple examples that I'll share while people are just typing up their responses. I think one thing that I can say was a moment that was very courageous for me was getting out of my comfort zone. I can think of a couple. One of them has to do with traveling. I went with Global Medical Brigades down to Honduras to run medical clinics, and I traveled all by myself through International Volunteer Headquarters to India to teach in the slum. And those things were really, really hard for me to do alone. They were very scary. Another thing that takes a fair amount of courage, I think, for an individual like myself is to become comfortable with myself and to go out there in the world. So I'm relatively open about the fact that I am a transgender person. And being transgender, it means that I can be very self-conscious at times about my body and my appearance and my identity. And just getting myself together, going out there, especially in a job where I'm frequently talking to people or in a public setting, it can take a certain amount of courage to put myself together and put myself out there, especially when I'm opening up about it as well. So those are, I guess, a couple of big moments from my life, but also just something that, every day takes a certain amount of courage or a certain amount of push, right? So Kathleen, I see that there's a couple of responses that have come in there if you want to go over those. Oh, your mute button though is a little sticky still.
Struggle is real today. So Stacy said moving to Alberta all by herself for 7 years. Catherine starting school. Tina says starting college at the age of 45. Going back to school is never easy, and moving away to another province is also never easy. Amanda says getting out of my comfort zone by going to the doctor's office alone. Ooh, very scary when you're still a teenager. I remember I still call my mom sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. For myself, it is now for Armenia. For myself, it is now in my life returning back to school after being away from being a student for over 30 years. So being brave enough to learn with all these new techie stuff, I completely understand that. And Jared is not allowing myself to be stuck in a toxic relationship. And he took the steps and got out. And now that he's engaged and happier than ever. These are all great comments. Thanks for sharing, everybody.
Oh, and I think one more just came in from April too.
Yeah, going back to school as well was a big change and very scary. I'm 35 and hadn't been in college since I was 18.
It's a big adjustment, right? It's a big adjustment.
Grief.
These are all great examples. And again, they're big moments, but also some things that are everyday moments as well that just take a bit of courage and a bit of bravery. Nicole just threw in a comment as well that she drove across the country to live in Moncton after living in Alberta for 30 years of her life. Whew, that would be quite a shift. Like, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And same thing like what Jennifer mentioned here too, about going back to school and being a parent of two, a single parent of two. That's a lot of responsibility and a lot of courage every day to be that active student and to be that present and that accountable parent. So excellent moments of courage, everybody.
As we saw, the bear represents courage in the indigenous culture. It also represents bravery. So bears may be gentle in nature, but display courage when there's threats. The mother bear has the courage and strength to face her fears and challenges while protecting her cubs. Bears are known to confront threats that they should be afraid of, and this is especially true of like female bears in protecting their cubs. So they have to show a lot of courage. Bears also like to rest and be playful, which shows us a balance. So they don't always have to be courage and brave, just sometimes. And it's like since we all, a lot of us come from different cultures or whatnot. How do you feel about the bear being a symbol for courage? And would anyone else would choose another animal, or is there another animal for them that represents courage?
Ooh, that's a good question. I know, like, I think of the bear when it comes to courage because I think of, the mama bear idea, right? Like, going to protect your cubs and being tough and being protective. So I know that's, for me, one of the first things that come to mind. Just hearing the story of the butterfly, though, it makes me think of the butterflies as being courageous, too. They start life as these little caterpillars. They undergo extreme transformations into these beautiful butterflies, and their whole world changes. And I know that oftentimes the butterfly is a symbol for transformation, but I don't know, to me that also takes a bit of courage as well. So I want to throw that out there for me before you start taking the comments.
Well, I kind of threw one out there to get the ball rolling. I wrote the lion. For some reason, for me, the lion represents courage, just because it looks all big and mighty, and they hunt and provide.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that we see a lot of that in media too, right? I'm reminded of one of my favorite childhood movies. I always loved The Lion King, right? And the lions are portrayed as very prideful, very courageous, very brave individuals, I guess, or characters.
Amanda says her dog, because they're courageous and they protect their owners. That's actually a really, really good one.
That is good. Are you my little courage? Oh, he's yawning. I don't know how brave he's feeling today. He's more sleepy, but I think dogs are beautifully loyal.
Amanda, you can go ahead if you'd like to speak.
I mean, I think it's a dog because, like, from past experience where my dog has protected me in very dangerous situations where they can, like, attack when they need to protect their owners.
And much like the bear, they can also be very loving and very, very affectionate and playful, can't they? I know my puppies certainly have that playful side. All right, so let's have a look over here on the next slide there.
So bravery. So the state of it's the state of having a fearless heart. Even though the consequences may be unpleasant, we need to be brave enough to do the right thing. Having integrity is doing the right thing. It takes courage to stand up for what isn't right. And we need to use our own unique and personal strengths to face adversity and make positive choices. We have the courage to stand up and speak up for what we believe. So just to get some ideas from you, that name one way that some of you display your bravery. Like, do you stand up for people? Are you able to admit when you're wrong or whatnot? Or if you don't have any ideas for that, you could also name a person that you consider brave and why. And this could be anybody that you know.
Somebody I consider to be very brave is the late and great Betty White. So as many of you may be aware, Betty White recently passed away, and one thing I've always admired about her has been the advocacy she has done for human rights as well as animal protection rights. So at a time when racial segregation was still really huge, you know, she was having people onto her shows and telling people to live with it, because they deserve the airtime too, regardless of race or ethnicity. And she's always been a huge advocate. So I think of Betty White as being a very brave woman. She's somebody that I think of. And another brave woman that comes to mind is the First Nations sun dancer that Chloe brought into our class, who shared her story of addiction recovery and reconnecting with her culture. And I just think that everything she's experienced and the way she overcame it through cultural connection and gives back to her community, I think that's really speaks to bravery and doing what isn't easy.
A few comments in the chat. So Chloe says admitting her mistakes, and that's definitely, you have to be courageous to do that. Amanda says stand up for people that can't stand up for themselves. We need more Amandas in this world.
We do. We have a Kristen in her too. I don't know if you noticed, but Kristen had a similar comment above that she likes to have a voice for those who can't have a voice for themselves. And I think that's important. Like, when we have the ability to be heard and someone else is not being heard, we can advocate. We can use that privilege to advocate for them, to have a good impact.
Arminius is learning from our program and being an advocate. Jared shared that he was the union rep at his previous job, and there was a worker in the company that was unfairly going to be dismissed, and he suffered from epilepsy, and he fought for the person and he won. So that's really good. You guys are all so nice and brave and courageous. We have Catherine here to set her dad's overcome so much in his life and had things thrown at him, and he stands so strong and he handles everything. And then Stacy says herself with all the surgeries that she's been through.
Absolutely. And thank you for that nice comment out there, Jessica. I appreciate that. That's really sweet too. There's a little bit
they're coming in too fast, and my computer's not fast enough for me to read them.
That's okay. She mentioned that she admires my bravery, and I think that's nice because there is bravery in each and every one of us, right? We all get thrown things in life, and it takes a certain amount of courage to overcome those things. And there's one more comment that came in there from Tina too about being a teenage mom, back in the day, and that's not an easy thing either, right? To be that stand-up mom when you yourself are still quite young. It's not easy. So this brings us to an idea around resiliency. I know that when I hear about courage and bravery, it sounds pretty scary. To do what's right when it isn't easy, to act with integrity, to be able to protect others or advocate for others, to overcome a challenge. Whew, that sounds hard. But I think resiliency is one of those tools that can help us, right? If we go through a painful event or something difficult, having resiliency can help us bounce back a little bit. It can help us try again. It can help us not be afraid to make mistakes or go out on a limb. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to tell you a little bit about resiliency and how we can build resiliency.
So resiliency, depending where you're at in which program, or especially in the child and youth care program, is a topic that's going to come up quite often. So resiliency is the process of adapting and bouncing back from adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or stress. Even though we go through painful events or difficulties, they don't determine our outcome in life because most of us have built some sort of resiliency. Being resilient is part of our personal growth process. And being resilient doesn't mean that you won't experience stress or trauma. Resiliency is often developed through those certain life events. It takes time to build or increase our resiliency. Some ways we could build on that is through connection, wellness, healthy thinking, and meaning. And then just wondering how you guys bounce back from difficult situations and how you showcase resiliency.
I think for me, a big part of me being resilient is having a support network and having mindful self-care. So I don't believe in facing my challenges or my problems in life alone. I don't believe in trying to do everything on my own. I believe in having a support network, connecting with people, having loving and meaningful relationships. And I also believe that investing in myself is investing in those around me, and investing in myself is investing in those that I love. So I need to actively find time here or there to self-care, because that puts me at a better place to be better for others. So to have that bounce back, I can't bounce back as much if I'm drained, I guess. So those are a bit of my thoughts for me, and then I'll let you go through the comments there.
Self-care is definitely important. Even Chloe brought up self-care. Different ways I try to build my resiliency or be able to bounce back is to accept change and to learn from the past or my past mistakes. Jared shares that he doesn't sit around and wait on anything. He got laid off and he hit the ground running. He's like, he has himself enrolled in school. And he has approved with TSD all within 2 weeks of getting laid off. Congratulations. That's resilient. That's a really good way of showcasing resiliency. Cassandra here says, using wider lens and thinking thoroughly about my situations and what's going on, which is part of her self-care. We have Jessica says her partner has always helped her bounce back, even when they weren't together. She always has their back, and self-care is another big one. So yeah, self-care is definitely one that comes back often for being able to bounce back.
I think so too. And I think being able to see the bright side is a big one, to take that literally right off your slide. Being able to transform things and see the silver lining instead of just focusing on the bad. A mistake is an opportunity to learn. Something bad that's happened, maybe there's something good that can come of it. I'm reminded of all of the trauma and the abuse and the mistreatment that the First Nations people have gone through over the generations. And we can't go back and we can't change those things. So the best we can do is work at this reconciliation process. One thing that I can learn to appreciate about them is the fact that having been through all of that adversity, I think that First Nations individuals are very resilient people as a whole. I think it has built a lot of resiliency in them, and I'm glad that they have that resiliency because I believe that there are a number of challenges that they need to overcome, that we need to heal, that we need to support. So I'll let you go back to those comments there, Kathleen.
Tina, I'm not sure if I said this one already, but sorry if I did. Tina's remembering what she's been through and that she's been through a lot. She could handle whatever comes her way. Armenia says we can learn from a mistake, and instead of beating ourselves up over it, to embrace and learn from it, which is an excellent point. And we have Amanda saying remembering that she has improved through her childhood and became a better person with that experience.
Nice. So knowing that, you know, we have these core values, these social experiences, we have these relationships, and you know, again, not crises, but instead opportunities to learn. I think a lot of these are different tips and different tricks for being resilient people ourselves. So here's a few more tips that you had put together for us, Kathleen, and I believe it actually follows a lovely little acronym for anybody out there that loves little word plays and stuff. You'll notice that it says resilience along the side here, and they're all standing for something. And this is just one little idea, right? There's a lot of different paths to developing and increasing your resiliency, but here are a couple of different ideas that we can look at for fun.
Fine. Sucker for acronyms sometimes, so since we have a bit of time, I'll just go through them. So for the R, remember you're good enough. Everyone is different. Stop comparing yourself. Individuality rocks. Learn something new daily. Involve yourself in what you love doing. Enjoy things that make you happy. And not everyone can be first, second, or third. Care about yourself and others, and expect that some days won't be great. So other ways of building resiliency is change the narrative. Stop reliving the same story. A good way to do so is by expressive writing or finding the silver lining. And like sometimes even if if you think that a situation's like really bad, try to find something positive inside of it.
Well,
another great.
Before you, yes. I just want to say something really quick on that, because I think you bring up such a good point that I just want to hammer home. You know, we put the words to our own story, right? So, you know, is this an all the time, and this, you know, it never works out and it's awful and terrible? Or are we putting the words to it where we can try to take a positive or more constructive or more objective look at it? Those thoughts are going to change and influence the way that we feel about things. Right? And our thoughts and our feelings, those are going to be a big part of being resilient, right? And having that bounce back. So I really think that the narrative we are giving ourselves is a huge one, right? What is your mental dialogue? Go ahead, Kathleen.
Another way is to face your fears. A way you could do so is slowly and repeatedly expose yourself to your fears. To practice self-compassion. A good way to think about this is, how would you treat a friend? Or if a friend came up to you with this situation, what would you say to them? We often tend to be a lot nicer to other people than ourselves and be harsher on ourselves. Another good way of building resiliency is mindfulness. You could do so by meditation or mindful breathing. And there's actually quite a few new apps out there today that help you practice mindfulness, either through like any app store on your Android or iPhone. And a good one is building resiliency is to cultivate forgiveness.
I think that's a big one too, especially towards ourselves. Like you mentioned, we can be our own toughest critics sometimes. So we need to be able to forgive others, and we need to let it go, and we need to be able to forgive ourselves as well. Let it go.
I know you have an urge to sing the song.
I do, but I'm keeping it
Anyone
inside.
knows Chloe.
Oh dear. But on a serious note, resiliency is strongly rooted in the Indigenous people because, again, they have gone through quite a bit of adversity. Residential school survivors have been through a number of crises. We recognize that these settings were places where they were frequently physically, mentally, sexually abused, where they were estranged from their culture and from their family members, and that this does not just impact the individuals who are enrolled in those schools, but it continues to ripple through their family and through their communities with lasting effects from trauma. However, we still see Indigenous culture starting to emerge. We see this reconciliation process beginning around our country. And I think that speaks to the fact that despite the hardships and the adversity that they've had to go through, there is a certain amount of resilience that they can be very, very proud of. They have lived through colonization, cultural genocide. They've been put into positions where we recognize that groups of First Nations people are some of our most vulnerable and high-risk people living in Canada. And yet they still manage to persevere. We still see that there are cultural practices like drumming, powwows, sweat lodges, all sorts of things beginning to reemerge as ways to support their healing and to support reconnection to cultural values. We see that our political structures and other places around the world are starting to acknowledge the wrongdoings and how things have actually gone historically. And we're starting to see them overcome a lot of trauma and a lot of adversity. And that speaks to resiliency. It speaks to bounce back. So these are a few of my thoughts on this one, but I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen for this, and then a look at the medicine wheel representation of it as well.
My thoughts were very similar to yours. The Indigenous people have demonstrated immense personal and cultural resiliency. They've used their strengths to protect themselves against stress, oppression, and continue to build a better future for themselves and their community, which shows immense resiliency. They have lived through colonization and cultural genocide that led them to being vulnerable to abuse. They use cultural practices such as drumming, powwows, and sweat lodges to support their healing, and their cultural values are seen as guiding practices and interactions amongst people. And if anyone wants to throw any ideas, how do you build or increase your resiliency? And some examples we might have seen before of that is mindfulness or self-care to help increase your resiliency.
This slide reminds me too that sometimes we can't avoid hardships. We can't avoid traumas. Some groups of individuals especially are at higher risk for hardships or traumas or social marginalization. And I think one thing that we can do is try to mentally frame those hardships as learning opportunities, growth opportunities. We can try to see that silver lining, some of those nice little bullets from the image earlier to motivate ourselves to bounce back from that moment instead of giving up after feeling hopeless. So. And I see there's a little comment there from Jared as well, trying to find the positives regardless of the situation. I'm big on that. I always try to flip it around. I always try to see that silver lining, that moment of something good out there.
Well, this is kind of a medicine wheel showing the resiliency. I believe in some of our previous lessons that we've kind of looked at the medicine wheel, so I just kind of thought that was a good image to show, that shows intergenerational trauma, the resiliencies, and the different aspects of the medicine wheel. And then all honesty, it's not big enough for me to read.
Oh, that's okay. I've got a bigger screen over here, so I can speak a little bit to the details within it. So we've learned earlier that the medicine wheel is, of course, about balance of different components and different sides of things. And so we see that going around this central part of the medicine wheel is violence, trauma, disempowered women, and vulnerability. And there is a look at different bullets that kind of go hand in hand with that. So there is dehumanization of this particular culture, which has led to violence. There has been colonization and cultural genocide and acts of violence, which have led to trauma. There has been a loss of a traditional way of life, economies and food sources, weakened traditional social controls, cultural norms and values, which has led them to be vulnerable. There's been an erosion of traditional roles in women, elders, family, kinship, and networks. And very specifically, the Indian Act disempowers women as well as First Nations individuals as a whole. But specifically, it's very hard to women, which also disempowers them as people. So all of this leads to cultural and colonialization and cultural genocide. And again, we see this being all centered around racism. So central to colonialization, cultural genocide, residential schools, and the 60s scoop is that racial ideology that one particular group of people is superior or more optimal than the other. Again, it's that dehumanization of the First Nations and the Indigenous culture, and the implying that Caucasian Christian culture was superior. We see that there continues to be echoes of racism present in child welfare, criminal justice, education, and healthcare systems, which is continuing to fuel this vulnerability, disempowerment, trauma, and violence noted near the center. And finally, we acknowledge that there's intergenerational trauma because of the ripple effect. Again, that trauma experienced by one person is felt by their family or their community. There are lasting impressions and connections there. And so although this is a lot of hardship, it does lead to the cultivation of resilience, because despite the tragic impacts of all of these different things, colonialization, cultural genocide, the different violence and traumas they've experienced, they demonstrate immense personal and cultural resilience. Again, we see the reemergence of some of their cultures and traditions, and we see people who are seeking personal treatments to break the cycle of trauma, or to break the cycle of substance abuse, or to break whatever cycles they might be living in as a result of these different impacts. So there's been a lot of change and a lot of growth, which is positive. That is the positive side. So we have a nice little video here just to show you. And this is speaking a little bit specifically to First Nations women and resiliency.
I'm completely passionate about Indigenous people and our need to close the socioeconomic gap between our community and the rest of society, and to restore our language, our culture, and our societies.
It hasn't been easy being Indigenous in this country. I'm living a life that I didn't even know existed when I was a child. I'm a residential school survivor. I was a 17-year-old mother, and now I'm a doctor.
It's about reminding and supporting our communities that we've been healing ourselves since time immemorial, for thousands of years.
We've had a really incredible opportunity in our communities to work with local women, local First Nations, and I'm so proud that as an Indigenous person, I can help to bring a lens of deeper understanding.
It's really powerful to know how much power women has, especially Indigenous women.
Any movements or activism around water, probably 99% of those were launched by Indigenous women.
Mentorship is important for a number of reasons. Really challenge someone to be the best they can be.
Community-based programming, I think, is really important. All of the information that we need as Indigenous people to heal and be resilient and live our full potential is within us already. And so it's really about uncovering that.
They can often see those leadership qualities in you years before you can see them in yourself and come to embrace them.
One of my biggest mentors in my life is my grandmother.
Being recognized to have that kind of potential and to be given the support to make it happen was quite the experience.
We advocate for women in leadership roles, and we try to mentor, the younger women to, bring their voices out.
The youth have their voice. The youth have strength within them. They're all leaders, and I think it's important to let them know that they have a voice and provide opportunities where they see themselves as leaders.
I'm encouraging young women now not to wait as long as I did, to find your voice or to pick up those sacred tools like the drum, the pipe, the rattle, the ceremony.
I want Indigenous youth voice to be heard and for them not to feel scared or ashamed to share their voice, because what they have to say is just as important as what anyone else has to say.
I wish for more people to recognize their potential and have hope.
Regardless of where you come from, your past doesn't have to define you.
There is hope in everyone and everywhere, and it's so hard to find that hope sometimes. Don't give up.
We have a way to go, I think, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
I really enjoyed this video clip because we see Indigenous women from all walks of life across Canada who are participating in this video clip, and they're sharing a little bit of their story and reminding us that the Indigenous people are especially resilient, and there's so many gifts that they can offer in helping to teach and guide us in that resilience development. I've worked once with an Indigenous youth, and one of the most meaningful and impactful things that we were able to do for them was connect them to a couple of female elders within their community who were able to bring them in for different sweat lodges and ceremonies and really help them to reflect on themselves and make some very big life changes. And so I think that recognizing that adversity and challenges in life can lead to the development of resiliency, and that is a gift that can be shared and learned. I think that's another way that we can learn about resilience. We can learn from one another. We can learn from the relationships that we hold and those people who show a lot of resilience. And as these individuals mentioned, community-based programs and community connections can be very instrumental in helping to make that happen. Now, there are a number of different characteristics for resilient people, and we're just going to go over this really quickly because I know we're getting on very close to 1 o'clock. But basically, resilient individuals have a realistic sense of their own choices, the different controls and the limitations that they have. They see change as an opportunity or as a challenge that they can try to overcome. And again, they see failure or mistakes as opportunities to learn and try something new. Secure attachments with others are, again, a common characteristic in resilient people. They have the ability to engage with other people and to ask for support as necessary. They tend to have personal goals, and they have ideas of how to accomplish those particular goals. So they have them and they achieve them. They have a strong sense of humor, and they have patience. So they're willing to take that second or third try. They're willing to laugh at their own mistake. They have a high tolerance of negative affect. Other people can't get them down. They generally have an optimistic outlook and a high level of adaptability. So our final thought to leave you with today is just a very short, I think it's 3 or 4 minute long video clip just to end the day off. And these are just 8 things that resilient people do, just to help give us a few ideas on what we can do to help increase some of these different characteristics. How can we try to work on being more patient or having a little bit more of a sense of humor or an optimistic outlook? And where we are wrapping up the day, if anyone else has any other suggestions on how we can feed into some of these things, how can we work on our patience? How can we work on our personal goals? How can we be more resilient? Feel free to throw those into the chat and share with our group members while we're taking in this quick little video clip.
Hello, Psych2Goers, and welcome back to another video. Your support helps us make mental health and psychology more accessible to everyone, and we wanted to thank you for all the love you've given us. Now back to the video. What is resilience? Resilience means you're able to withstand or recover from difficult situations in your life. it can help us deal with heartbreak, failure, and life stressors. When we build our resilience, we're able to better recover from hardships and setbacks in a more healthy way. Resilience might be something you're searching for, especially now, between dealing with the pandemic and trying to return to some semblance of normalcy. Staying resilient in these trying times is key in keeping up with your mental and physical health. With that said, these are 8 things resilient people do. 1. You stay flexible and open-minded. Do you often stay open to new ideas, opportunities, and solutions? Resilience is all about trying to make the best out of what may seem like the worst. When you're resilient, you don't have a one-track mind. You give yourself the time and opportunity to think everything out before jumping to a conclusion or fretting over worst-case scenarios. 2. You practice patience and kindness. Whether it's in the workplace or with friends, you're known for showing patience and kindness towards others. This includes being kind to yourself when you mess up. Being kind and patient with yourself is just as important as it is with other people. 3. You're generally optimistic. When something bad happens, are you able to look at the big picture? You don't let one bad slip-up ruin your whole day, and know not to fixate on the bad things. You focus on what you're grateful for, like your friends, family, and possessions, instead of looking for the negatives. This optimistic mindset isn't only a key part of being resilient, but it can also help make you happier overall. 4. You live in the present. It's easy to fall into spiraling thoughts of your regrets and past mistakes, wondering what might have been. But dwelling on your mistakes won't change anything about your past. Moving on and learning from your mistakes takes resilience. When you're resilient, you learn how to accept what happened to you and focus on what you can do in the present. 5. You value and build good relationships. Do you take the extra time needed to build those strong relationships with the important people in your lives? Having a support system is very important. Friends and family are the ones who are there to celebrate your highs and a shoulder to cry on during your lows. As someone who is resilient, you know that once you've built a strong support system, then you're set for life. 6. You know and consider your limits. Are you aware when you need help, or do you burn yourself out unnecessarily? No one is perfect, and no one can do everything by themselves. Everyone has blind spots and weaknesses. This is why you know when to confide in your trusted peers, or when to take a break, and how to practice good self-care. 7. You know how to handle rejection. Rejection in any form can be hard to swallow. Maybe you didn't get the job you really wanted, or your crush doesn't like you back in the same way. Do you take these things very personally and think you're not good enough? Or do you recognize instead that there are other factors involved in making these decisions, like other more qualified applicants or another person's feelings? As someone who is resilient, you try not to let rejection get the best of you and decide to move forward instead of letting any kind of self-loathing hold you back. 8. You like spending time alone. Do you like to take time alone to process things, reflect, or get to know your inner self? When you spend time alone to think through your troubles, it can help you sort out your feelings and any possible actions you can take. Reflecting upon things and growing from them are some of the best ways you can learn. Who knows, you might learn new things about your inner self you never expected to. Whether you're still working on building your resilience or you already are a resilient person, every bit counts. Do you relate to any of these things mentioned in this video? Or do you have any tips on building resilience?
I'm sure we do. So thank you so much for the compliments, ladies. So resilience, just to kind of wrap everything up for the day, I think it helps us to be courageous, to be brave, to go out there and do things that are difficult, even when, well, we know it's going to be difficult. It's the right thing, but it's hard to do. And having resiliency and that ability to bounce back is going to make it easier for us to do that. I think we need to be courageous and get out of our comfort zone if we're going to continue to be active participants in the reconciliation process. One time I got out of my comfort zone by getting the courage together to ask a series of elders if I could take my class to a ceremonial sweat lodge, to experience that with them so that we could learn from their culture and see what it was like and learn from their elders and their stories. That took a fair amount of courage to push myself out of my comfort zone, to ask to do that and to go and do that. But again, it worked out pretty well. I'm pretty resilient. I was ready to bounce back if I needed to, but having the courage, it worked out well, and our students had a great opportunity. A lot like those butterflies. They just had the courage to ask to be let out in the garden, and they were. So, with that in mind, Kathleen,
Let us know in the comments.
Is there anything else you would like to say just before we wrap up our presentation and wish everybody a happy week ahead of them?
Thank everyone who joined us today, and thanks for sharing all your great ideas and your stories. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful to have everybody in here, a nice, lovely, large crowd again this week, and great input and great comments throughout. So thank you very much to everybody for putting those in and being so participatory. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week. We're going to be continuing on, and I hope all of you have a great week ahead of you. So thank you, Kathleen, and thank you everybody else for attending. Take care, everyone.